Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Nicci Chats 2. This is a show that is really focused on changing people's perspective by giving you a different view of the world. And to share this view, I bring on people who I find interesting and who I believe are experts in different fields to share their wisdom, their insights, their information, and make you change the way you think and see the world from a different perspective. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicci. My company is called The Why Effect, and I do various bits and pieces of work around changing perspective. And today with me is my fabulous friend, Nwabisa Mayema, and she is the Director for Strategic Partnerships at the Branson Centre. And she has come in today to give us more insight into strategic partnerships and more insights into purpose-led entrepreneurship. So, Nwabisa, thanks for being here.
Hi, Nicci. So good to spend some time with you and looking forward to the chat that we'll have and curious to see where we end up. So yeah, let's go.
We always have really interesting chats. So no doubt you will get a lot of value from this. And as I said in my post, Nwabisa is not only insightful and clever, she is also really entertaining and just a really great person to chat to. So before we kind of dig into like the strategic partnership nitty-gritty, tell me about your journey from kind of, I suppose, sort of leaving varsity and all of those kind of things into how you ended up at the Branson Centre and why it's aligned with your values and all of those kind of things.
Sure. So I think what's funny is, when you look back at any part of your journey, suddenly you have the language and you have a great way of being able to explain it, which makes it seem like everything was seamless as you were going through it. So, of course, my journey has been interesting for me, and it has also had very interesting ups and downs and, little spirals and backwards and forwards and that kind of thing. And so I finished university thinking that I was going to create my own job because I had convinced myself that I was unemployable. And so started a business, which is probably not a great starting point for starting a business in terms of being like, well, I'm unemployable, let me start this thing. But actually, what I realized was that in doing that, and why I thought I was unemployable was because I kind of don't exist to conform to authority. But at the same time, I'm really driven by this idea of relationships and how if you can connect people together, they can make a whole lot of stuff happen beyond you doing it yourself. And of course, I have the language today. At the time, I was just confused. And so started a business, which was a consultancy in corporate social responsibility. And so when I look back, I frame that in the understanding that I felt the need for young South Africans to be deeply involved in whatever transformation that needed to happen in South Africa. And at the same time, that involvement had to be supported by corporate South Africa because everybody had a vested interest in making sure that this transformation would happen and stabilize society and all the good things that come from that sort of thing. And so I ran this consultancy for 10 and a half years. And during that time, though, the word entrepreneur didn't exist. You ran a business. And, I feel like it's only later on that we started even using the word entrepreneur. And for me, the moment that word landed, which was probably fully 8 years into my journey, did I then understand that entrepreneurship came also with a sense of responsibility, a sense of leadership, and also almost needing to be visionary and almost be a little bit ahead of your own business as you go along. And so I thought, well, if you're going to keep running ahead of your own business and keep running ahead of your day-to-day, what is the safety sort of measure that you have? Because sometimes it feels like you're jumping off on a bungee cord that maybe isn't that well tied. And for me, I realized that the safety sort of net for myself and something to help me feel a little bit more secure as I was running ahead were my relationships. And so, I then thought, well, I have 8 years into the business, carried on for another 2.5 years, and I realized that I'd actually outgrown that business. And so started another business with you. And the purpose of that business was to figure out effectively, again, I look back and realize it was trying to work out how can you get people to connect to each other, particularly women business owners. And through those connections, you actually unearth opportunities. Now, I do think that the thing with that kind of business model was it was almost one, ahead of its curve, or two, it's almost impossible to actually monetize relationships. I mean, we know that the likes of Facebook are not monetizing the relationships, they're advertising data and insights, and hence advertising. So this business actually was a great foundation and a great platform to understand what it means to connect, what it means to get, social capital as a driver of business growth. But it probably wasn't a very good business in terms of then making money. And that's okay. That's part of the entrepreneurial
And
journey.
we
We've got to
learned that.
learn. We've got to learn by not making money. But we had fun trying. And so for me, that kind of brought me to a 15 years sort of milestone of having been an entrepreneur, never having worked for anyone. And there was a couple of things that I learned, and I looked back and I thought, well, one, I was feeling a bit tired, and that's okay as well when you're an entrepreneur to be tired. And felt that I needed some support and needed to be in a more of a team-driven environment, but I didn't necessarily want to lead the team, which we'll put a pin in that because that's the joke. Whether I like it or not, I end up maybe being in positions of leadership. The second piece was that I was feeling lonely. And the third was I actually was starting to articulate my purpose. And so actually all of this brought me to what I thought was my purpose, and I actually now believe is my purpose, which is to connect people to each other and to opportunities. And so then the conversation I had with myself was, how can I make sure that I'm resourced to be able to fulfill my purpose and therefore get to a point where we can enable entrepreneurs? And so how can I rather be an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs as opposed to running my own business? And so it's kind of like this release moment. And yes, now it's going to feel a bit seamless and fairy tale like, but I kid you not, the moment I started articulating that, I then was able to meet Richard, be involved in the launch of the Branson Centre For Entrepreneurship here in South Africa. And I now serve as the strategic partnerships director. And I'm literally sitting in a position where it's all about the relationships and making sure that the Branson Centre is the most collaborative enabler of entrepreneurs. But I'm actually living my purpose because it's the idea that entrepreneurs actually, whilst they need access to capital, they need access to network in order to access markets. And those three things work together. And so that's the idea of partnering and partnerships. How can I bring value to you and you bring value to me? And at all times, we exist to just fulfill each other's objectives. In my words, fulfill each other's purpose. And so I think that's the journey. That sums up almost 20 years of fun.
There are a few things that I love what you said there. So, I mean, you touched on the loneliness of being an entrepreneur. And I mean, that's something that I have experienced myself, and a lot of people that I speak to. Some of us are micro enterprises and single consultants. Some of us are employing people, but there definitely seems to be this consistent messaging of loneliness when you start or are running your own business and you get to that position of leadership. I also love what you say about responsibility and seeing yourself as a leader and taking that on, because, there was a quote that I stole and sort of tweaked from Spider-Man to say that because, it's the great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. And I believe that with great freedom comes great responsibility. And I think as an entrepreneur, you touched on the fact that you unemployable because, yes, it was possibly not great with authority, but there was this desire for freedom. And that comes with responsibility, and you have to own that. But I want to sort of start digging into this notion of partnerships and this notion of relationships, because I personally have experienced, just to give you a little bit of a case study here, the power of connection. And interestingly enough, I experienced that through you, where you connected me to the Austrian Leadership Program in, I think it was 2016. I ended up traveling to Austria on the program early in 2017, if I remember correctly. And as a result, I've built up very strong relationships with a lot of individuals in that country. And it didn't pay dividends, if I can put it that way, immediately. But down the line, there have definitely been actual monetary benefits where I can say, I've ended up working with, two of my friends that are based in Vienna, Bistro and Christina, who run a company called Heartbeats. I'm currently working on a project with them. So it did take a little while, but it did end up paying benefits. But I I want to get down sort of now, get into this issue of strategic partnerships and this notion of transactional relationships, because you spoke about I'm adding value to you, you adding value to me, and our goal is to meet each other's objectives. Where does the transactional part come in? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think it's maybe reframing the word transaction and rather saying, when does the exchange happen? In terms of something is going to be exchanged, whether and so we've got to understand that value is not just the money. And so I think for me, transaction just places us at just a money space. When we start talking about exchange, it's this idea that sometimes I can sit with a partner in the room, and the idea is that that partner will bring value into my work, either maybe because by association, because maybe they speak about me, or and by me, about my organization, that in itself lends credibility. Or if they talk about me, I lend credibility into their organization. And so there's already some sort of exchange of value going on there. Or then that partner, because there's been an open relationship of understanding why we do what we do. So always going back to purpose. They sometimes then even lessen the load in my work, because then they start doing the heavy lifting of introducing me to other partners, and they actually talk about exactly what it is that I do, because they now understand me, which means that by the time I'm talking to a potential partner, they've actually done the whole sort of heavy lifting of introducing me. And in fact, it's a warm relationship. It's probably going to now be much more generative because it's happened now from a place of trust. So for me, partnerships then become this extended idea of a lifetime interaction as opposed to a transaction, which can then be once off because we're ticking something off according to a financial year or to that particular annual objective. Whereas a partnership, you're constantly in conversation, you're constantly finding out about the other person. In fact, what's more interesting is that you spend less time telling people about what you're doing, and you spend more time finding out about them, because actually that's when the power of being able to connect them to yourself, but also to connect them to another organization. And so you spend more time listening, whereas I think when we're doing sales, we spend more time talking. And so it's also talking about, but the interesting thing is that it comes with patience, exactly as you've articulated it, which is, you know, in my world, a valuable and generative partnership probably comes out 12 to 18 months after the first engagement with that partner, which is very hard if you are chasing down sales, because you want your sales pipeline to kind of fulfill itself within 6 weeks. And so, you know, when I'm talking to other entrepreneurs or to other entities and other organizations, your partnership specialist, try very hard not to then layer them with the sales or the business development element, because that's very different sort of objectives. Your partnership specialist is actually bringing in an entire ecosystem of support, which part of it will probably have financial rewards, but a lot of it will actually be about support that's almost intangible, but is actually incredibly important for then making sure that those financial rewards start coming through. So you've got to separate those two functions if possible, if you have those resources.
So I love what you say about approaching relationships from a sense of value, as opposed to, so what value can you bring? And value might be education, it might be other connections, it is not necessarily financial. So almost removing that need to, you know, kind of, it's money, it's about monetizing it, to actually like, what value am I getting out of this? So what would you, I mean, given that you do have experience in running your number of years experience in running your own business, if I'm a one-man business, so I don't have the resources to have a strategic partnership person and a salesperson, but I still need that ecosystem. So what advice would you possibly give to somebody like me to say, how do I go about separating those? Do I just separate those roles in my head? Or what sort of like practical things do you think I could do around splitting those out without splitting the resources?
Yeah. So, I
Mm,
mean, some of it, and it's such a delicate balance, right? Because at
mm,
the end of the day, we're trying to pay our bills first, never mind then create wealth or anything like that.
mm,
But every now and again, challenge yourself, whether it's for, a day in the week or, a couple of days per month, whatever, where you actually go into conversations and you're not selling and you're not going to talk about trying to gain a client, but you're coming in to say, let me share with you why I do what I do. So let me share with you the purpose of my business. And I would really be intrigued, and this is the question you asked to the other person, I'd be really intrigued to find out why you do what you do. Let's not go into the what. And suddenly, what
mm,
it does is it opens up a relatively refreshing conversation, but also 100% illuminating conversation, because suddenly you start getting to understand the individual, and then you start understanding the business that they're in, and then you start understanding pain points, and then that's when you start understanding the value that you can bring, because you've understood something. Value
mm,
doesn't just come into the room because you think you have value. Value comes into the room when the other person actually understands that you're going to solve something for them. And you can't understand that until you ask them about it and you also display what you're about. Now, what's going to happen is that person will also understand what keeps you up at night, what excites you, what moves you, what irritates you. And so they'll
mm,
also get to a point where maybe the next conversation, or now it's sitting top of mind, and suddenly you start getting those phone calls where somebody goes, Nicci, I was talking to somebody else and your name came up, because now they understand you. Or I was wondering, shouldn't we be doing this together? And so that's a
mm,
different conversation that actually opens up and broadens your world of possibilities. Now it's a very scary thing to do, because you have a wolf at the door that's saying you need to, make sure that you break even this
mm,
month, that you can pay your bills. And hence why I'm saying it's something that where you almost get yourself to the place of exercising the muscle, where you say, on this day of the week, I'm only in conversations where I'm having coffees and just learning about other people and their businesses. And yes, these are my target list of clients or target list of
mm,
partners, but I'm not going to sell to them.
mm. It feels a lot like, there's a lot of sort of language now, and there has been for the past few years, around this notion of what has been called authentic selling, where it is no longer about me as the salesperson, if I can put it that way, but it actually really shifts to becoming more about the other person in the room. What are your issues? Let's have a conversation about you. So, I mean, I love that you like sort of physically leave that person at the door, and I'm going into this just to have a cup of coffee, just to have a
Yeah,
conversation. And I mean, I agree, it can be very difficult to
it
not slip
is.
into that salesy role.
Yeah, I get it. And I think
Mm,
sometimes it's almost like shift your mindsets. Of course, I'm lucky I live in Cape Town, and so maybe the lifestyle in Cape Town is different. But I know that when I'm now properly in turbo partnership mode, I put on a pair of walking shoes and my meetings happen on the seafront, and I go for a walk, because there's something that changes the conversation where you're not sitting at a table, you're not sitting in an online
mm,
meeting, but suddenly you've invited somebody to go for a walk, and it changes. It almost feels inappropriate to start talking about targets and that kind of thing when you're on
mm,
a walk and watching whales. And so now you can start talking about what is it that keeps you up at night, and you start repeating that. And so maybe you can almost trick yourself by changing even how you are in a meeting, when you are meeting people, where it's not the proverbial briefcase, it's not the proverbial high
mm,
heels, but rather you've challenged yourself into that. And I find that my morning walks with potential partners have been more generative than me trying to do back-to-back Zoom calls or trying to run a conference or anything like that.
But that's an interesting point. That, I mean, you say it's Cape Town, so maybe there is that sort of flexibility. But is that also not about reading the room and
Yeah.
going, this is where I am, this is what is appropriate for the room, and this is how I will respond to that? Because I know, I mean, you've got partnerships with people all over the world. It's not just in Cape Town. So yes, there are a few people, well, when I say a few, as in like globally, Cape Town is a small place, that you can go for these walks with. But you can't do that with everybody. So
Yeah,
you need that level of adjustment where you might be on a Zoom meeting, but you've got to mimic the walk along the promenade
absolutely.
vibe.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think there's almost that thing where, and it's so difficult because I know how difficult it is, but it's challenging yourself to just be so clear on why you do what you do, because that in itself will also start helping you to filter out what room you're in. So what happens is, as entrepreneurs, we want to be in all the rooms all the time because we must try and find all the opportunities. And then we wonder why we're so exhausted. But it's okay to filter so that you can be efficient and perhaps improve your strike rate, where you then think about, why do you do what I do? Does that potential partner have an alignment with why I do what I do? And if it's a no, that's not your room. What it means is that when it is a yes, you can then walk into that room, whether it's virtual or in person, and you can still be yourself and not have to put on different hats and different masks. So even when I am in a virtual conversation with the largest sort of multilateral donor organizations or the largest multinational corporations, because I know why I do what I do, and part of it, aligns with who they are. There's actually very little of a code switch or personality change. I'm still coming in with my red nails and my red lipstick. I might actually have a glass of wine in that conversation whilst talking to,
Mm.
Mrs. Big Shot so and so sitting in London. And they will be so tickled and so entertained by that, because I'm showing up as my 100% self, and I'm coming in true to my purpose. And so you don't have to put on an act, and that maybe comes with a little bit of maturity. But once you know why you do what you do, and you're comfortable with the fact that you're in alignment with whoever you're talking to, even from a superficial level, you can actually do away with a lot of the things that stress us out, where we find then ourselves having to rely on a script to sell, where now you can sit and engage and listen and exchange and be comfortable that the next call will build onto what you've been talking about, and the next call and the next call, and eventually you land on what you need to land on.
That's really interesting. So I know that you are, and as I said, I have personally experienced this, you are fantastic at networking. You're great at connecting with people, at building those relationships. Not necessarily everybody has those skills. So and you didn't start off with a great base as a network, even though it might have been, however many years ago. Where would you kind of guide somebody towards starting building a network, building these strategic partnerships? If I've been, there's a lot of talk now about this great resignation. People are leaving their corporate jobs and starting different things. So they're not necessarily starting things that are aligned with the current network that they have. Where would those people start?
So I'd actually say start with your current network. So what happens is, when we sit with our phone books, we kind of have the 5 most frequently contacted people, and we forget what we're doing with the rest of our phone book. So I'd say, and this is an exercise that I do from time to time, and it's quite exhausting and sometimes quite emotional. You literally take every single name in your phone book and you put it on a post-it, each name, and you lay that post-it, all those post-its on the floor, on a whiteboard or whatever. And then you kind of work out the categories that make sense to you, right? So when I do this, I'll say, okay, I'd like to split my network up into people in corporates, people in academia, people in the media, fellow entrepreneurs, people in the NGO sector and civil society. So that's kind of just how I categorize my network. And then I take each post-it and I look at it and I put it into each then category, each bucket. And visually, you actually start then mapping out your network, and you see where you're strong. And so maybe that's your first port of call in terms of going to talk to those people. If my network sits there, let me go talk to them and find out what's going on. What do I need to know? How can I help? How can I be useful? How can they help me? So that's what I would do. And then you also start literally seeing where your network is a little bit wonky, or where there's a gap. And so then you start actively searching out for those people and being like, I need to understand more people in academia. So I've got one friend in academia. Let me ask them to introduce me to a colleague, or that kind of thing. So start with what you have.
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm back.
Yeah,
Cool.
no, you
So,
hear.
yeah. So start with actually, I'd say start with exactly what you have, and you'll be quite surprised by how powerful your own network already is. And your own network is very ready to help you. That's the whole point of why we gather around each other.
I love that, and I've never actually thought of doing that. So thank you. I mean, I think that's wonderful advice. And even if you've got, I mean, as we said, like let's say your network is very corporate heavy and you will have 10 people in that network, and let's assume each of them know 10 people. That's already 100 people that you're working with. So I mean, I love that. And then it also does become it in sales we obviously have this term of warm leads. It's somebody that it's somebody you've interacted with. And I suppose it's also a good way to clear out your contacts, because I've got people's numbers in my
Exactly.
phone where I'm like, I don't even remember who this person is, so you can clear
Exactly.
them out as well.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then here's the thing, your network is not going to know how to help you until you tell your network. So once you understand who sits in your network, you start understanding what it is that you need, because again, it goes back to understanding why you do what you do. So it also means that it kind of changes some of the conversations you start having with people, because how many times have you met a friend at the shop and they go, how's it going? And you're like, it's fine. Meanwhile, you kind of have your little thing in your brain where you're going, listen, it's okay, but I was actually wondering, could we grab a cup of coffee to talk about XYZ, please? Chances are that person will say, maybe I don't have time right now, or ping me my diary, let's go. Yeah, you're just stop being overwhelmed with, it's fine.
I love that, because I think, I mean, in so many different ways, and this is another conversation for another day, but this whole thing of it's fine has proven during the last couple of years to be one of the worst things, when all of a sudden it's fine. And then next thing you know, somebody's committing suicide, because I have literally seen that pattern playing out. But yeah, let's not go there. But I mean, I love this, because this is like really practical advice. It's showing up. I mean, this word gets so overused, but it's showing up authentically. It's showing up honestly. And it's not this fake, I almost want to say, oh, Nwabisa, can we go for a glass of wine? Because I just want to catch up. Meanwhile, I actually want to bounce a business idea off you or share something with you. And I'm sort of getting in there via the back door. It's just
Yeah.
being honest. I want to talk to you about this. Are you in a position to help me? Can I buy you a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or lunch or whatever the case may be? Fantastic. So that's some really, really great advice. And it's something that we can all do literally like this afternoon. So that's wonderful. So now let's talk a little bit more. I mean, we have sort of been building up to this about this notion of purpose-led entrepreneurship. So where is kind of the intersection? Because there's been a lot of conversation about the social and sustainable economy and social businesses and all of that sort of thing. So where do you think is the intersection of this? What is happening in social and purpose-led entrepreneurship? What are the trends that you're seeing? How do people go about this? What are your thoughts around that?
Mm. So I think, I mean, purpose is a huge thing to sit and
Mm.
try and figure out. But I think it's so important to start understanding that if you have that North Star, which is your purpose, suddenly you kind of liberate yourself by being defined by your product, by being defined by your service. But rather, if you can define yourself by your purpose, your product and your service then kind of are shaped by that. And it helps you start making some sensible decisions around where to even put resources in your business, be it yourself, be it time, be it extra money and that kind of thing. So I think that that's the first place where purpose isn't just this thing that sits out there. It's when it is embedded in you and your business, it becomes everything, and it changes all of your conversations and all of the decisions that you make in your business. And I hate to use another very oft-used word in the last little bit, which is it actually builds in the resilience, because it helps you make that big decision you need to make, or the small decision you need to make in a time of crisis. And funny enough, it also helps you make decisions in a time of opportunity. So that's purpose, right? Flowing on from purpose as a result is I'm wary of adding adjectives before the word business or the word entrepreneur. So I think, we'll talk about impact entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, that kind of thing. And I'm going, no, no, no. Everybody's an entrepreneur. By virtue of you getting out there and creating a business, and you've got people who are paying you for your goods or for your services, you're an entrepreneur. Now, are you, do you have impact embedded, by design in your business? Do you have purpose embedded in your business? That becomes other questions, but you're an entrepreneur, full stop. Because I think when we're walking around talking about social entrepreneurship, impact entrepreneurship, we start othering. And as a result, we sit in these little boxes of whether it's pocket funding or access to networks, and we're missing out on the greater universe of what's going on. And it actually also brings in a little bit of I guess purpose paralysis, I could put it that way, but I've just made that up, in the sense that a lot of the times your purpose-led businesses are seen as a consequence, or as a consequence of what's going on in mainstream business. So I'm here as a purpose-led business because I'm here to solve for all the bad that mainstream business has done. And so this poor entrepreneur is actually trying to solve now for all the whales that are being killed in the ocean. Meanwhile, they're actually part of building together an inclusive economy with all types of business. And so I'm getting to the point that I think I'm nervous about putting that adjective in front of businesses. But I think what we are seeing is that we can actually talk about the fact that the purpose-led businesses that we were working with during the first lockdown, the first shock, not a single one of those businesses lost their jobs or lost any jobs that they created up until that point. Of course, they didn't necessarily create jobs during that time, but they didn't lose any. And there was something interesting, because it was the purpose conversation that would help each entrepreneur make the decision around what they need to do to protect the jobs that they created in their business, which is incredible in the South African context. So suddenly they weren't attached to, for example, an entrepreneur who had to close their storefront. So they weren't attached to having a store on a main road, but they were, the purpose, which was to enable a specific community of people through their business, that became that. And so they ended up going into a centralized location, and they're now doing 100 times better than they were doing before the lockdown, never mind actually, in terms of during lockdown, because they use the purpose to guide them to make the next decision given the current environment. So I think that's an interesting trend to see that coming through, and that purpose actually equals resilience.
Wow. I mean, I just love what you said about not this notion of othering, that I'm a social business, you not, I'm good, you bad, you're in your box, I sit in mine, that there's actually this massive opportunity that we're missing out on, and that this purpose actually becomes something that is very strategic as well, because it does guide your decision making. And when you have to, God, we're using all the jargon, when you have to pivot because of going into lockdown, it guides those parameters. Fundamentally, I am not a shop that sits on a high street, for instance, or in a flea market, or wherever the case may be. I am somebody who serves a community by doing X. So my channels to market just become different, and my approach becomes different. But I'm still serving that market and fulfilling that purpose. So it does help you guide them. So just getting back to what we were talking about earlier, June Whitman just commented. She said, "Thank you for reminding me that my network actually cares about me," which is lovely.
Yes, everybody
exactly
wants you to do well.
Yeah. So what would you say to people? And I personally have, I'm sure you do as well, I have this conversation with people a lot who usually looking to leave corporate. So, and it's strange that so many people are finding themselves in this position. And they've actually said to me, I don't know what my purpose is. What advice would you give to somebody like that about where do you start? Because they don't want to end up leaving a job that they are obviously not really happy in, but we need to pay the bills, and end up going into something else that they're not really happy in. So if you're going to make this big transition, like I really want to get it right this time, but I don't know what my purpose is.
Look for the patterns. So, think about, when were you at your most fulfilled? When were you at your most excited? When were you at your most brave? So even when things were tough or you were afraid, but you still were like, no, it's fine. We'll get there because you were brave. What was happening in that moment, and what were you doing, and what was around you? And suddenly you start picking up on the patterns. And so, and another friend of mine says, look for the things that troll you. Like, what keeps on landing in your space. Every time you look this way, that you're back in this conversation, you're back in this space. Either it's to point out what it is that you're fighting against, or to point out what it is that really excites you. And so once you start picking up that pattern, you can start then doing the bigger work around, getting the coaching, having the conversations around what is happening. And so we talk about gather stories. So gather your own story, and then gather stories from other people. Ask people, what do you think I'm about? Why do you think I do what I do? Because other people will also observe you. So gather stories. The second thing is actually then sort of filter out those stories and start picking up then those patterns, right? People are going to start saying the same thing. Chances are you'll probably land up with 3 versions of your story coming through. Their story, our story, your story. So that's quite interesting. And then from there, you'll actually start drilling down. But you've got to be disciplined to drill down until you get to the point where you can go, I exist too. And that's it. I'm making it sound super simple, but it's simple steps to put together something that's quite complex, which is purpose. And here's the thing about purpose, is that it's not a destination. So there's probably no one on this earth, unless they're the holiest of the holiest, that can actually look and go, oh, I've fulfilled my purpose 100%. I've reached it. I'm done. It's always this thing that just guides you towards the next step of your journey. But you never can say, done, sorted, new purpose, next.
I love that. That's such a beautiful way of putting it. And I think there's a lot that certainly that I'm seeing, and I know both you and I are big fans of Susan David, and she talks a lot about this notion of values. And what you're saying about purpose is very much aligned to this, what your values are and what's important to you. And I was brought up with the notion that your values are sacred. They are carved in stone. They are called your values because they do not change. From the time you are, I'm not sure what age they got carved into the stone, I'm maybe 10. Now sitting here like 40 years later, those values must still stand there. And now all of a sudden, I'm reading all these things and seeing all this literature and all these conversations about how your values actually do shift over time, and just as you shift. And I love this notion that your purpose, that your values are actually a moving goalpost, that it's going to you have to keep checking yourself on it, and you have to do the self-reflection and revisit and go, hang on, because maybe, I don't know, maybe you get married and have children, and then your purpose is going to shift, or it might split in a way because suddenly you've got extra responsibilities.
Yeah, so it's the data point that comes through from the values, the emotions, the how, the when, your environment. And so for me, it's saying your purpose kind of is there, and then you keep on checking in on it. So we often talk about SMART goals, right? All the jargon. So, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, reliable. I don't know what the R is, and time-based. And then we've actually added an E and an R. That's not just us, but I think we quite like to sit on this idea of smarter goals, which is this idea of you evaluate and you review. And I think what happens is we often articulate our values, we articulate our purpose, we articulate our goals, our objectives so many times as we vision board at the beginning of the year. And we forget to actually evaluate and review in terms of, does this still stand? Yes, I said I wanted to be there, or I wanted to be like this, but is that still true, valid, and relevant for knowing what I know today? And sometimes it's not, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it does also lead into this notion that you make the best decision with the information that you have at the time. And maybe 6 months down the line, you get a whole lot more information. So actually looking back, you would have made a different decision, but you didn't know what you know. So it feeds
Absolutely.
into this shifting of purpose. And I think a lot of people, given what has happened in the past couple of years and the loss and the trauma and just the craziness that we've all experienced, a lot of us are revisiting our values and our purpose
Yeah.
and what does my life actually mean. You know, when you've lost somebody close to you, you automatically sort of, hang on, what is my life about? What does this mean for me? So I love that it becomes a journey and not a destination. And I mean, as for vision boarding, you know my story of the first time in my life I decided to do a vision board was at the beginning of 2020. Needless to say, I
Wow.
have never done another vision board because I don't want to
Yeah.
repeat that.
Yeah.
January
No.
2020, just so now I do other things instead.
Yes. No, I'm there with you. I'm not good with vision boards.
But I think, I think there's, and this is also where, as human beings, we have to allow ourselves a level of flexibility. So you build networks and you build strategic partnerships in a very specific way that works for you and achieves the results, and you get the value out of them that you want to. Your way is not going to be copy and paste. It might not
Yeah.
work for me. I might need a different approach, just like I might need a different approach to digging deep and finding my purpose. But I think it all becomes a journey of self-reflection and digging deep
Yeah.
and looking into yourself and seeing what you want to do.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I think it's a me bringing in. I feel like we should have had word bingo, but it is the notion of going through things with a sense of mindfulness. When we go through our relationships, our partnership building, why we build our businesses, how we position ourselves in relation to our businesses, or even as we think about starting businesses or leaving our businesses. It's why do I do what I do?
Well, for anybody who's watching this, maybe in the evening, you can turn this into a drinking game, and every time there's a bit of jargon, you can take a shot to a sip of wine. So we're okay with that. So just kind of on a personal note, without sort of putting you on the spot, where do you think, because earlier on you spoke about bravery and sort of, doing things that might make you, or that do make you very uncomfortable and possibly a little bit fearful. For you, how do you kind of overcome that fear? How do you help get yourself through those moments where you need to be brave? I mean, you've been an entrepreneur. That's a scary journey. You engaging with a lot of big, important people at the moment. That can easily become very intimidating. And so just like on a personal note, what do you do for yourself to push through that fear and be brave in spite of the fear?
I laugh at myself a lot, and I remind myself that I am not anywhere as important as I think I am. So if I think by making a mistake the sun won't rise, or the stock market will crash, or someone's life will be in ruins, I'm not as important as I think I am. And therefore, there's something that just settles me, and I kind of have a giggle where I'm like, look at you standing in this room using big words and getting all these people to listen to you. Like this, it's just a sense of humor, guys. It's as simple as that. Where every now and again, I'm like, I'm not as important as I think I am. I'm really not. And so even when I think I've fumbled over the words, it's going, no one was that invested in you giving a perfect speech, because you're not as important as you think you are. But perhaps what they invested in is how will you make them feel after they've been around you, as opposed to what did you say and what did you do in the room. So can I at least walk out of a room and know that people feel relaxed, they feel connected, maybe to each other or to themselves and hopefully to me. That's all I'm looking for as my indicator of success. And so that takes off all the pressure of I'm going to make a mistake.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. And it's actually interesting because I was listening to the radio this morning and they had somebody on from Toastmasters who was talking about, people overcoming their fear of public speaking. And one of the key things was oh, there we go. Sorry, I froze for a second there. You are kind of sticking your neck out and putting yourself out there. What happens if I make a mistake, if I fumble my words? And yet it's those very things, that vulnerability that actually makes you human and actually makes me feel better. That here's Nwabisa, who I thought was so perfect and so brilliant and so awesome. Like, actually, she's a human being just like me. And I mean, the first time I spoke at a conference, it was the first time I had ever stood up in front of an audience. I was quite nauseous, I'm not going to lie. But being surrounded by people who I saw as being very seasoned public speakers and seeing how nervous they were, it's like, you know what? You're also sweating before you go on stage. So actually, we all normal, and we all need to not take ourselves so seriously and remember that, life is a joke and we're all going to make mistakes.
Yes, we're all normal. I think that's the takeaway.
Well, Nwabisa, this has been so much fun chatting to you, and it's been so enlightening and interesting, and as I knew it would be. And you've given such incredible advice, and it's practical, and it's just things that people can really get stuck into and get going on, and they can do tomorrow that will shift how they approach their businesses and shift how they approach their networks and possibly even their careers. Is there any sort of final words that you want to say besides life is a joke and we're all normal?
No, honestly, I think that's going to be my mantra for the next 2 weeks, which is life is a joke and we're all normal. And so thank you for this platform. And I hope that whoever's listening kind of just maybe something lands and you can go out there and think about the world as one big playground for partnerships, as opposed to a scary place that's out there to smash you down.
Fantastic. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, where's the best place to reach you?
LinkedIn probably is the best way to do it.
You're pretty active there. Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you to those of you who are watching this as a recording or have joined us live. I really appreciate it. And I will be back next week, where I will be chatting to my friend Stephanie Wright about transformation and transformational leadership, which is going to be a very interesting conversation. So thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.